For the first time in many years, there are real grounds for cautious optimism, and the year 2026 could bring Ukraine a just and lasting peace. This is what the Telegraph columnist Hamish de Breton-Gordon writes. The analyst notes that Donald Trump's statements claiming that a peace agreement on Ukraine is 95% ready have clearly caused panic in Moscow, which has manifested itself in the usual Kremlin manner, crude disinformation and implausible narratives. A vivid example of this is the claim that one of Putin's many palaces was attacked by 91 drones this week.
The CIA informed the US president that this was almost certainly a false flag operation. This clumsy and unambiguous attempt to derail the peace process, which is quickly slipping out of the Kremlin's control. Even more damaging for Putin is that his own population is beginning to doubt this version of events. When propaganda collapses at home, regimes soon follow.
The analyst notes that, at the same time, Putin understands that his only remaining leverage is to drive a wedge between Trump and Zelensky. However, today, Trump is noticeably less susceptible to Kremlin manipulation than he was just a few weeks ago, and this is leading the White House toward a peace that, although not ideal for Ukraine, is much worse for Moscow. As the commentator emphasizes, it is extremely important that the security guarantees from the US and NATO essentially amount to NATO protection. Even more alarming for the Kremlin is Trump's open discussion of the presence of Western troops on Ukrainian territory.
This is the worst-case scenario for Putin. No amount of manipulation, even at the height of the Kremlin's propaganda machine, could disguise such an outcome as anything other than a defeat.
With a frozen front line, it will be Trump, not Putin, negotiating with Kiev over access to rare earth minerals in the Donbass. If you add to this the growing likelihood of reparations as well as the possible seizure of frozen Russian assets, the Russian economy appears even more unstable, the analyst notes.
The CIA has deprived the president of ability to see through the Kremlin deception. Trump has Putin in a stranglehold.
Concerns about nuclear escalation persist. However, the usual nuclear threats from the Kremlin have virtually disappeared in recent weeks. And that's no coincidence. Moscow understands that this no longer scares European leaders, the analyst emphasizes. As Politico wrote, the odds of the war ending on Trump's terms are 4-1.
Vladimir Putin simply couldn't do it. The Times has reported in detail exactly how the Russian dictator, Vladimir Putin, has seriously messed up. Putin will do absolutely everything he possibly can to avoid showing any sign of weakness. But that crucial and pivotal moment is already right at the doorstep.
And for more details, check out our report. You're watching the Glavred channel. I'm your host, Yevgeny Serov. Please like and subscribe to the channel now, if you can.
The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, who has been in power for 26 years, is on the very threshold of becoming the longest ruling leader of the Russian Federation since the Tsarist era. Nevertheless, on January 12th, it will be 1,418 days that Russia has been unsuccessfully trying to defeat Ukraine. The Great Patriotic War, which was the Eastern Front of World War II, lasted just as long, according to the Times. According to the journalists, for President Vladimir Putin, the notably low effectiveness of the Russian army serves as an unpleasant and uncomfortable reminder that his military machine is not nearly as well-oiled or efficient as his own military officials would have him believe. That is precisely why he will do everything in his power not to show any sign of weakness. The publication emphasizes that so far there are no signs that the enormous losses suffered by the Russian army amid such slow progress or the sanctions will force Putin to compromise on his ultimate goal, to bring Kiev back into Moscow's sphere of influence. As reported by Glavred, Doctor of Economics and Professor Igor Lipsitz stated that the Russian dictator and war criminal Vladimir Putin is already fully aware that the Russian economy, in its current state, cannot withstand a prolonged and drawn-out war. He is concerned and fears a repeat of the USSR's collapse scenario. That is precisely why he is currently demonstrating a willingness to negotiate an end to the ongoing war, but only on his own specific terms. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated that peace in Ukraine could potentially be achieved within just a few weeks, but he also added that Ukraine would have to make compromises regarding important territorial issues. At the same time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine as a state would not be able to win the war against Russia without further support from the United States itself, specifically from their President Donald Trump, emphasizing the critical importance of this assistance.
Donald Trump does not hold the belief that Ukraine attacked Putin's residence. He clearly said this while speaking with journalists. The US president was reminded that he was angry with Volodymyr Zelensky after the incident and immediately stated this publicly at a briefing. So why did Trump believe Putin at that moment? Let's listen.
Because at that moment, no one knew. I mean, I heard about it for the first time. He said that his house had been attacked. Now, when we've been able to verify it, we don't believe it happened. But it was the first thing we heard about it.
We have a guest joining us, Ihor Popov, expert from the United Ukraine Center. Mr. Ihor, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Ihor, well, let's break it down. Now, regarding this statement by Donald Trump, who once again, perhaps rather suddenly and unexpectedly changed his opinion about what the Kremlin is telling him and how things are actually happening in reality.
There are clear indications that American intelligence agencies have not seen any evidence of a fake attack from Ukraine. Regarding the Valdai residence, there had been signals about this earlier. And so we understand that through channels of secret diplomacy, the United States informed the Russian Federation that they should not engage in provocations, but rather continue peaceful negotiations and seek reasonable compromises. And now Donald Trump's personal statement confirms this. In other words, intelligence is working, diplomacy is working.
Mr. Ihor, in your opinion, or based on your observations, does Donald Trump fully trust his own intelligence services?
There are approximately 24 different federal intelligence agencies in the United States. A system of checks and balances and parallel information channels has been built. And that is why even technical and satellite intelligence often function in parallel with one another. This way, the political leadership can carefully and thoroughly verify their data. Because during changes in political power, scandals periodically occur when both the FBI leadership and the heads of intelligence agencies. Sometimes, individuals try to use sensitive classified information for political purposes. And after that, there are high-profile resignations and scandals. So this factor needs to be taken into account. But in this case, not a single intelligence agency, not a single satellite saw any attacks from Ukraine, specifically on this residence. Well, there's no technical reason either. No particular purpose, because what they write, according to the information, there are 14 Panzer systems and an S-400 stationed there. In other words, breaking through this defense is quite difficult, and launching expensive drones at a target that is so well protected doesn't really make sense.
Mr. Ihor, in your opinion, excuse my slang, are Donald Trump and his team riding high? At this very moment, are they on a roll? If so, then, in your view, with what kind of mood, emotional state, and with what intentions do you think they will approach these upcoming meetings of the European community, which we will discuss separately in more detail?
Indeed, the operation in Venezuela is being recognized as a success by the American administration. This is to a large extent a personal achievement of Marco Rubio as well. In Venezuela, among other things, there is once again a secret operation underway. There is diplomacy between the US, Russia, and China. And so, in exchange for some, if not actual concessions, then at least a certain degree of consideration of Russia's significant economic interest in Venezuela, the United States will, in all likelihood, demand further and additional concessions from Russia in the ongoing peace negotiations on Ukraine.
Well, let's move on to what is expected to happen on the European continent. President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced a series of meetings in Europe as part of ongoing diplomatic efforts aimed at finally ending the war. He himself reported this during his address to Ukrainians. Let's listen to him.
We are already preparing for the next diplomatic week. There will be meetings in Europe that should become another contribution to Ukraine's defense and to bringing the end of the war closer. Ukraine will prepare for both possible scenarios of how events may develop further. The diplomacy that we are currently undertaking or continued active defense at this moment. If the pressure from our partners on Russia proves insufficient, Ukraine seeks peace, but Ukraine will not give up its strength to anyone.
So, Mr. Ihor, upcoming meetings in Europe for diplomatic efforts to end the war. What are your expectations and how are the reference points shifting, particularly for our European partners?
Today, an important meeting of the high-level chiefs of general staff was announced, where they were supposed to agree on the military component of security guarantees. The day before yesterday, advisors to the leaders of states and governments on national security issues were working in Kiev. There, on the one hand, there was good news regarding the economic bloc, namely the creation of the so-called prosperity framework. Both our Prime Minister and the Minister of Economy were involved in this, meaning a plan for Ukraine's recovery with the creation of several funds, sources of financing, and priorities. So this is a very important component of the overall peace process, and the recovery should begin immediately after the ceasefire. And all the plans must be developed before that, but of course, security guarantees were also discussed at the advisors level. We see that this is quite difficult. Countries are understandably afraid to take on specific security guarantees and to enter into concrete defense alliances. So the advisors discussed this, but at the political level, this will be discussed precisely this week, literally tomorrow or the day after. In Paris, as far as I currently understand, a coalition meeting is actually planned, specifically a coalition minute meeting. So it's hard to call them decisive for now, but calling them indecisive would be offensive.